I'm here to listen. Why am I walking on this way?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Muse's AT Podcast, where you can relive my epic journey with me. This is Muse, and what follows is my Appalachian Trail story. Today's episode covers Thursday, June 26th, 2025. Today, we experience another relatively easy day in this flat land right before the Bigelows. It is also the day that I met Conrad and Justin, so this episode will talk a little bit more about who was and who wasn't hiking with me for this stretch. And then I also had a great lunch break, essentially with some folks back home. Today's haiku was written October 23rd, 2023. Keep the longer view. Proceed slowly. Keep rhythm. In tempo, find self. Been a little while since we've had one of these, but it is time to return to the trail glossary because we do have a term that comes up today. And that term is something called a Nero. Now, we talked about a zero a while ago, and that is simply a day where you take a total rest day and you hike 0 miles. A Nero is somewhat similar, but you're going to get at least a few miles. So if you log only, I don't know, there's no strict definition or anything, but if you log 2, 3, 4 miles, something like that, you are doing something called a Nero. It is more or less a rest day, but it's not a zero. Later on, we'll actually finish out a trifecta here with something called a hero, but that doesn't come up today. Today we will talk about a Nero. All right, the picture that I'm looking at today is another really good one. So this is from that lunch break spot. So maybe as I'm describing this picture, no, I'll let that wait till the commentary that I really talk about the lunch break spot. Let me just describe the picture. So as with so many of these pictures, they are almost framed by foliage in the near foreground because you're kind of taking a picture through that and to whatever you're taking a picture of. So that it's kind of a half frame. I've got some leaves and such out to the right of the frame. The left of the frame's open. And then it looks like there's some rocks heading up to this pond. I don't know what pond it is. Maybe that's worth looking up. Okay, I believe the pond in question is actually Flagstaff Lake, which is actually a pretty large lake, so it's not really just a pond. But what I am looking at is a very serene surface of the lake here with some land out there. Not a huge epic mountain or anything like that, but a piece of land that has at least some height to it here in the distance, and then clouds behind that. It really is a pretty nice picture, and this was the lunch spot that I picked. And you'll hear more about that lunch spot in both the entry and the commentary coming up. With that, let's go ahead and read this entry. June 26th, 2025. Recovery Day. Start, West Carry Pond Lean-To, Maine. End, Little Bigelow Lean-To, Maine. Miles, 7.7. The plan today was an easy 7.7 to the next shelter. I'd had a couple of decently big days, and I wanted to be fresh to take on the Bigelows tomorrow, so I took it easy. Fuego was thinking about this strategy, but I was always pretty sure she would push a little further, as she seemed like she didn't love the thought of the big day tomorrow. From the shelter log, she did push past here. I'd guess the campsite just on the other side of Little Bigelow Mountain, about 5 more miles. I found out Ribbit and Spicy did take the Nero yesterday, about 4 miles to Pierce Pond Lean-To, so they may be behind me for a day or two. A bit lighter on the Nobos today. I had only one real conversation with a guy from Nebraska, Cinnamon Buns. He seemed pretty cool, excited as all these guys are, and for good reason. They've hiked over 2,000 miles and are within 200 of finishing. Scoped out an awesome place to eat lunch. It was a rock outcropping adjacent to a campsite that overlooked the lake and the upcoming Bigelow Range. Thinking about the folks back home, I thought I'd see if I had cell service, and was surprised to find out that I did. So I sent that picture and exchanged a number of texts. It was a nice time. Later on, I met Conrad and Justin, section hikers who have pretty much pieced together all of the AT sections of Maine and New Hampshire over the years, as well as a number of other hikes in the area. Fun guys to talk to. If I had to guess, they are probably about 2 to 3 years younger than me. They were taking a break when I caught up to them, and I learned they were aiming for the same shelter as me, so we chatted some on the trail and then again over dinner. That's about it for today. It was easy and peaceful. Going to bed early tonight to try and break camp around sunrise tomorrow. I hear there's rain coming, so I'd like to experience the Bigelows before there are too many clouds. I hear the Bigelows are great. All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from the sponsors who help keep Muse's AT podcast on the trail. These are offerings that truly enhanced my thru-hike experience, so I'd really like you to check them out. Please look for and follow the links in the show notes to this episode. Looking forward to that lazy day on the couch, knocking down your Netflix queue and wondering what to wear? Quick answer, wear something else. Summit Ready Apparel is clothing built for those who scramble over jagged rocks, reach the peaks, and actually enjoy getting caught in a torrential downpour. If you're someone who doesn't mind the elements and has the grit to crush the next segment anyway, look no further than Summit Ready to match your restless trail spirit. Check out the catalog at summitreadyapparel.com and get ready for your next adventure. That's summitreadyapparel.com. Looking for your next great trail read? Walk Uphill is a powerful story about leaving the emptiness of modern corporate life behind and finding a completely new beginning on the Appalachian Trail. It's about discovering what life can look like when you embrace freedom, lighten your load, and take it step by relentless step. I actually read this book myself during a couple rest days in Gorham, New Hampshire, right after conquering the brutal terrain of southern Maine. I literally couldn't put it down. I read it from cover to cover in 2 days. The book chronicles the real-life events of the author, Bounce the Hiker, in a twisty, shocking, edge-of-your-seat story that even the most imaginative fiction writer couldn't make up. Just a quick content warning, there is definitely adult material in this book, so I wouldn't recommend buying it for your 10-year-old's birthday. But if you're looking for a gripping, raw trail adventure, I highly recommend Walk Uphill by Bounce the Hiker. You can find it easily on Amazon by searching Walk Uphill Book, or just click the direct link in the show notes of this episode. Well, I guess describing the picture kind of backfired on me a little bit. I'm looking at the picture again now, and from this picture, it really isn't obvious that those are bigger mountains, but obviously they were. On the day that I wrote the entry, I would have known that I was actually taking a picture of the Bigelows, which I'm about to enter. And the Bigelows are no joke. The Bigelows were a lot of fun, actually. You heard me say it a couple of episodes ago. My favorite stretch on the trail, I don't know. I have so many favorite stretches on the trail, but it was an awesome one anyway. I remember the sentiment that I expressed at the very end of it. I remember being excited about the Bigelows, and they didn't let me down. We'll get into that obviously next week, but I remember that they didn't let me down at all. The Bigelows absolutely were awesome. That actually becomes a little bit of the topic on the lunch break. So let's kind of go into first that lunch break that I've been talking about. And I first settled into this serene place that I described and ate my lunch. And then I did get to thinking about folks back home. Now, for the neighborhood crowd, it hadn't really been too long. This was Thursday, June 26th. My last text back home to the neighbors had been on Tuesday, June 17th. Actually, it looks like I was talking about moose droppings because I haven't really mentioned that too much on the podcast here, but there were plenty of moose droppings. And up until now, I hadn't seen any moose. That's coming relatively soon, but had not seen any moose. And actually, I never saw any moose on trail. The only time I ever saw a moose was when Carrie and Evan come to visit. I drove Carrie's rental car. The three of us rode together just specifically to try and go see a moose. And we were successful. Anyway, that story's coming up here in a few weeks. Back to today. So I'm sitting there. I'm in this serene spot. I start the neighbors get on my mind. And so I text that group chat. So this is from Thursday, June 26th at 1:40 p.m. Stopped for lunch right here. And I sent them the picture, probably the same picture that I'm describing. I've changed phones since. So I only have a can't load file, so I can't see what picture I sent them. Anyway, stop for lunch right here. Just another 2.5 to go today. Taking a recovery day today before tackling the Bigelows tomorrow. And I'm going to slide past a couple things here, but then Jeannie, who is one of my neighbors, such sights are good for the soul. Thanks for sending it. Bigelows steep and rough. Not the steepest or roughest that I have in front of me, but significant. Supposed to be awesome 360-degree views from the top, though. I'm going to try and get up there early. It's supposed to rain sometime tomorrow, so if I can beat the clouds and catch those views, that's what I'm going for. So that was great. It was great to be talking back home. Great to be sharing what I was excited about. As I mentioned, I was excited about the Bigelows. I shared that back with my friends. I also had a text from Brandon as well. And you guys will remember Brandon. I was doing a few day hikes with Brandon as I was getting ready to embark on this journey. So Brandon is my next door neighbor. And he's just a good friend, right? Jeannie, who I just mentioned, is a good friend as well. Brandon is a good friend. And Brandon had texted me probably a time before. This was probably when I just turned on my phone for service, because we're still in the relatively remote places where I am traveling on airplane mode most of the time. So I'm guessing the real dynamic of this and why this tells me 1:38 p.m. is when I got the text from Brandon is he'd probably texted me even days before, and I finally just came off of airplane mode. Well, no, that wouldn't be true because I called home 2 nights prior. So he probably texted me like the day before or maybe even earlier that day. So anyway, here is Brandon's text because it's a nice one as well. Hi, Joe. I heard that Haley is home. I read her final post on the Trail Journal. You should be, and I know you are, extremely proud of the beautiful, strong, and independent woman you and Carrie have raised. It takes a lot of courage to walk in the wilderness, both literally and figuratively, no matter how long. I hope you're meeting new people to share the journey. I'm really enjoying your post on the journal. Don't forget I have a bottle of Blanton's ready when you get home. So there's my text from Brandon. It was great. And I was meeting new people, as you guys know, and it was really good. And that bottle of Blanton's, we actually did crack that Ratatouille and I did back in February when he visited. And I think I've had some with Brandon as well. I think, kind of hope that's true. If it's not, I'll remedy that soon. Anyway, so it was great. It was a wonderful lunch break, not only because of my surroundings. I'd chosen the spot really well. I was looking out over this lake. I was seeing the Bigelows in front of me. I also got sort of reconnected, and I just remember being on an emotional high because of this little respite. The next thing to do from here is probably to not only catch you up a little bit, but also give the geographical overview of this section. If we define this section as ending when we get into the hostel of Maine, the geographical overview going forward is actually pretty easy. We climb the Bigelows, we come out of the Bigelows into the hostel of Maine. Up to this point, it was cross the Kennebec, and I want to drill in on crossing the Kennebec in just a moment, but cross the Kennebec and then really a very flat, and I made it 2 days by making this day particularly short. I suppose the previous day, I was just thinking about this, the previous day would have been my second longest day on trail thus far at 14 miles, the longest day having been Goat Soap Day on June 22nd, 14.6. And then the day into Caratunk was over those mountains, and it was that brutally hot day. So I guess in that context, the idea that I'd take a little recovery before going into the Bigelows actually isn't that crazy. But the terrain from the Kennebec to this point, to Little Bigelow Lean-To, was actually super flat. So I'd had a couple of days here, 22 miles, I suppose, of super flat land before I was ready to take on the Bigelows. And really a lot of water features. So we crossed the Kennebec. Obviously, there's the Kennebec itself, but then also Carrie Pond, which is East Carrie Pond and West Carrie Pond. I do think there were 2 of them. And we ended up at West Carrie Pond shelter at the end of last entry. But those are significant ponds in that the trail goes all the way around them, which that'll happen sometimes. So you have these days where you're just really looking at this pond all day, which is great. And then, of course, there's Flagstaff Lake, which is a sizable lake. The trail only kind of skirts the side of it. So I got to see it here on this lunch break, but wouldn't really necessarily see the immensity of this lake because it was a pretty large body of water. So then back to crossing the Kennebec. So this will be the first, well, I suppose I walked through a couple rivers, the Piscataquis, the Pleasant, but this will be the first big river crossing that I had on trail. And it's the one time that you really are not supposed to ford the river. And that is the ATC's advice is do not ford the river, absolutely on no circumstances ford the river, because not only is it very wide, I like when I looked at this river, when I saw it, I'm like, they wouldn't have even had to tell me that. I would have sought some other way around anyway, because it's like 300, 400 feet wide. So I don't know. I would have never thought that I should just wade through that to the other side. But to top that off, there is some sort of power plant or something nearby. There is a dam that releases water, and it does this somewhat erratically. You don't know when it's going to happen. I think it probably blares a warning or something like that. But if you're in the middle of this really wide river, there's no way you can do anything about that at that point, and you're just going to get swept away by this influx of water that's going to come at you. So don't cross the Kennebec. Now, what the ATC does along with that advice not to cross the Kennebec is they provide this ferry. And so it's just like, as in the entry, it's this guy with a canoe, and he can take 2 people. He's, first of all, an awesome guy. I don't remember his name. I wish I recorded his name, but he was an awesome guy. I think there are a couple different gentlemen that do it. He pointed out the eagle. That was really cool. Took me forever to see it. The other thing that was really cool was the way he went about it, because he knew exactly how to angle the boat out into the river such that the current of the river would take us back to the trail on the other side, and he hit the trailhead perfectly. So that was pretty cool. And then I also remember I had told him about my fall just a couple of days before. You guys might remember my fall where I came down really hard on the rock. And I don't know if he made this up on the spot or it's actually a saying or whatever, but he said something like, if it's white, you'll be all right. If it's brown, you're going down. And basically what he was saying was if the rock was brownish in color because it was wet, you could be in some trouble there and you ought to be extra careful. And I just remembered that going forward. And I think I looked at rock hopping that way a bit going forward as well. So who knows? Maybe that guy saved me a few extra falls going down trail. So that's crossing the Kennebec. I get across the Kennebec. I try to get the picture of the eagle like you heard in last entry. That was a fail. But the thing was, as you also heard last entry, I couldn't zoom in on my camera, on my phone. And no, I did not ever end up getting that fixed. So I dealt with this for the whole rest of the trail, and my pictures get increasingly worse as we go down trail. But if I could just zoom out and take a picture, and especially if it's like a landscape or something like that, it's not crazy to just zoom out and take a picture instead of zooming in. So I could get some decent pictures sometimes. Also, and we're going to come across it a number of times here coming up, I liked these peak photos, especially one of the things the MATC was really good about was posting signs that you were at the peak. So I'd take a selfie with that sign. The selfie camera was working really well too. So anyway, so my camera was such that I needed to try and get over to that eagle if I was going to get a picture of him. So I tried to rock hop over to him. He flew away, but I was looking down, navigating my way, because I'm rock hopping and everything. And I look up one time and he's gone. So he must have just flown away while I was trying to make my way over there. So I did not get a picture of that eagle. Would have been cool though, because that was just really cool anyway. Having him just perched in that tree that whole time. You saw this like speck of white against everything. And that's how I finally found him after the guy had been pointing him out for a while. Once I found him though, he's just like a very amazing creature. All right, the next thing I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about who's there, who's not there, because who's not there is actually a little bit significant here as well. So between Caratunk and Carabasset Valley, who is with me? Today today I wake up with Fuego. So we're at the shelter together. I don't think either of us, early on, I wasn't really big on the shelters, which is probably funny to my friends that I hiked with who know me as only having gone in the shelters. But early on, I did not like that. So probably I was in a tent near the shelter, and I think Fuego was the same. I don't think either one of us actually slept in the shelter. But anyway, woke up at the same shelter with Fuego, and that becomes exit Fuego. I don't see her at all for the rest of the hike, but I do know, and you heard it a couple episodes ago, she did very well. She made it all the way to Springer, and congratulations, Fuego, on that. And she kept, I'm assuming anyway, just what I know from my conversations with her, she kept a very constant pace of probably 15 to 20 miles every day. And if you do that, you're going to get there pretty quickly. And I think she got there in early November. She did end up joining the Instagram chat, and that was relatively late. I'm going to guess she got in there sometime in October, maybe late September. And so we had a little bit of chatting with Fuego back and forth, so we had an idea of where she was, but it's cool. It's cool to just even know she was out ahead of me and know that she was still crushing it. And then on this day, I would meet Conrad and Justin. And Conrad and Justin were awesome. There was these two old friends, I want to say from like high school, and they were out there just doing really whatever hike they wanted to do. And this particular one would have been, maybe it was Caratunk. I'm not sure where it started, but it ended a little bit beyond the Hostel of Maine. So whenever Spicy Ribbit and I go into the Hostel of Maine, we end up saying our goodbyes to Justin and Conrad, and they would move on to, I think, like the next road intersection where maybe one of their cars was. I wasn't absolutely sure, or I'm just not remembering a year later exactly what the setup was. We'll end up learning a little bit more about Justin and Conrad through my entries later on, so I'll probably dispense with saying too much more about them here in this episode, but it was great. So I got to the shelter, and these guys that I had met earlier in the day are there, and we're chatting over dinner and everything. One of the kind of fun dynamics was that Justin was not ultralight. Let's just put it that way. He carried a whole bunch of stuff, and he carried a really heavy pack. And so he'd fall behind Conrad a little bit. And Conrad would just say, different philosophies. You know, he's carrying more stuff. He ends up a little slower. I'll just wait for him. And I think that was the dynamic even when I met him a little after lunch, was he was waiting for Justin. I met him. We talked for a little bit. And then I think I was using the facilities at the campsite that we were at is what ended up happening. And then I would leave, and then I wouldn't actually meet Justin until that evening. But they were great guys and ended up really hiking with them for a lot of this week. You'll catch in a couple episodes that I'm on Avery Peak hanging out with Conrad for a while. And then I end up hiking out of the Bigelows or a lot of the rest of the path that day with Justin. And then, of course, there's Spicy and Ribbit. Now, you already know from our conversations that Spicy and Ribbit will be with me until the Hostel of Maine, Carabasset Valley. So the rest of this week, they would be behind me this whole day just because they did end up opting for that short day. I think the long and short of that is you heard them in the interview say they did a lot of swimming. So I think they liked that pond, Pierce Pond. I didn't even mention that pond when I was talking geography, but Pierce Pond, they just enjoyed that spot and stayed at that lean-to the rest of that day. And I remember talking to them about, because they would say, oh yeah, we're not very fast or whatever. And I was like, you guys are just like chill, not fast though. Like you would go and just find a spot and be like, we like it here. We'll spend the rest of the day. And that's what made them not fast at times. So that was fun. And of course, that's what I was sometimes too. And that's what we all were sometimes, I would hope. But they definitely exemplified that a day before. And so they spent this whole day behind me. They would end up catching me up on Avery Peak, which Avery Peak, yes, named by Meyer and Avery. I think we do have to, before we get there, maybe fill in. I remember I said, we'll talk trail history and this guy's important, but I didn't say much else about him. We probably ought to fill in that importance here next episode as well. I wanted to also talk about who is not there, because there are some significant people that are not around at this time, and especially zeroing in on people I would then meet again. So the first pair of hikers that I wanted to highlight at this point are Dan and Michaela. And you guys will remember Dan and Michaela because they were very present for the whole first week that we were on trail, as well as, and I don't think I probably spoke about them much during the Munson time, but they were also hanging out with us really the whole time we're in Munson as well. So Dan and Michaela, these people we basically met on, call it June 3rd, probably was June 3rd, that we then saw till food drop June 12th. and then again in Munson. And that's kind of the profile of our coinciding with Dan and Michaela. But they're not around. I left Munson on that Sunday, and I believe they probably left Munson on that Monday. And so they're still behind me at this point because I really hadn't slowed down enough to really let anybody catch up just yet. And from here, Michaela would eventually leave the trail. She would hike all the way to Rangeley. And I think Dan and Michaela had a similar Rangeley experience as Haley and I had in Munson, where are we going? Are we not? I talked to Dan a little bit later, and spoiler alert, I talked to Dan a little bit later, and I believe that's the way it went. And then Dan would get back on trail, and then he would very quickly get ahead of me. Dan was super fast, and he actually got out ahead of basically the whole rest of the Sobo crowd at one point. But that comes a little bit later on. Where I kind of want to leave this description of Dan and Michaela is, yep, they're not around. They are not a current part of Muse's Appalachian Trail story. But then there actually would become a couple weeks later this sort of enigma about Metronome. Little spoiler alert, Metronome's Dan, but it's kind of funny how that all unfolded. And I'll leave that right there. I've probably told the story before, but I'll leave it there because I'll let it sort of unfold in real time when that comes. The next pair of hikers that I'll talk about not being there will be Kiddo and Hero. As you heard when we left Caratunk, we left them behind, so to speak. They were going to catching flights. Hero back home to Colorado, and Kiddo had something to do along the AT. I didn't really know what it was at the time. I think I probably have a little bit more insight on it now, but she had something to do, and then she would rejoin the trail at Caratunk and continue. Turns out, as I would later catch up with Kiddo as well, so she is going to be another returning character in this story. I will see Kiddo again way on out into Virginia. So I'll run into Kiddo again in Virginia. But the other thing that will start to get at some point, even this is a ways off, that I start listening to her book. And she was really on trail, and this has probably had to do with the engagement she had. She was really on trail as sort of kind of a book tour. So that was really cool. And her book was amazing. And it really became a big part of my hike going forward. So we'll get there when we get there. And then the other person I want to mention that had already been in the story, not right now, but will again later, is Frogger. I'll end up seeing Frogger again at the Notch Hostel where I met Ratatouille and Shotgun, but he gets out ahead of me again, and then I end up seeing him yet again in Virginia at the big hiker get-together near a palooza just south of the Shenandoahs. So here are some of the people that are not around right now, but you've met them, and they're coming back. So I thought that'd be kind of a fun little thing to bring into the sort of who's who section. And I think that'll do it for today. Next episode, I'm going to bring you that on-trail interview that I did with Ratatouille and Shotgun. So really looking forward to having that out to you guys as well, because that was an awesome conversation. Until then, this has been Muse, and you have been listening to Muse's AT Podcast. Thank you for walking with me, and happy trails.